Powering Wales Renewably is a project led by National Grid ESO. Hopefully Sean will join shortly, who's the project lead for this, and as part of the virtual energy system, we're closely aligned with that program of work within the ESO. The other partners are National Grid Electricity Distribution, National Grid Transmission, CGI, and also the Welsh Government. The presenters today will be Sean from the ESO, Rich Hampshire from CGI, and myself, Simon Brown, who leads the smart grid team at CGI. Next slide, please. So Powering Wales Renewably, one of the key areas that this project looks to address, I think, is to address some of the Welsh Government's ambitious decarbonisation plans. So we're looking to identify and evaluate potential use for flexibility, but also align with local area energy plans and the Welsh Government's decarbonisation plans, with the aim of increasing renewable electricity hosting capacity and also delivering the net zero transition for the Welsh citizens and their communities. So if we move on to the next slide, I'll pass over to Rich Hampshire, my colleague, who will take through the overview of the project. Rich, you there?
I am indeed. Thanks, Simon. As Simon said, I'm Rich Hampshire from CGI, and through the foundation phase, I've had the privilege of facilitating the stakeholder engagement workshops. Powering Wales Renewably addresses the SIF Round 2, Challenge 2, preparing for a net zero power system. As well as the ESO, who are leading this project, Powering Wales Renewably involves the Welsh Government, who, as well as bringing together the different interests across the Welsh Government itself, they've provided access to representatives of key stakeholders from across the electricity system user communities. These included developers, investors, and representatives from community groups. To complete coverage of the whole electricity system value chain, the project partners included National Grid Electricity Transmission and electricity distribution. The objectives of Powering Wales Renewably is to provide visibility across the whole electricity transmission and distribution system to help better inform decision taking. The output of this will be to provide a foundation that can be combined with other data sets to help different stakeholders to better inform their plans and, as I said, improve their strategic decision taking. Data sets that will be incrementally integrated into the digital twin that we'll be building through the different phases of this project will include existing reinforcement plans, local area energy plans, future energy scenarios, and distributed future energy scenarios, and the network location of distributed and customer energy resources. Powering Wales Renewably builds on and leverages the learning from previous innovation projects and the investment in the distribution integrated network model and the virtual energy system. Our approach has been use case driven. Use cases we used as the basis for the workshops that we held with project partners and with stakeholders throughout this discovery phase. Stakeholder input about what they value and what they would find useful has been used to refine the use cases and prioritize what we will do in the alpha and subsequent beta phases. The project delivers the first use case at scale for the virtual energy system and is set in the context of the whole electricity system and is based on the inclusion of stakeholders from across the system value chain. Next slide, please. In terms of our approach through this discovery phase, our activity has been very much stakeholder led. We held 13 workshops and individual interviews to identify our stakeholders' priorities. This process involved 25 different individuals from across the stakeholder organisations, partners, and the different groups involved. Whilst our initial view and preferences was to do these as workshops, given the challenging timescale, we had to adapt and run smaller sessions and individual interviews to getting into people's diaries. This ensured that we were able to get input from our target stakeholders. We initially ran a series of bilateral workshops or interviews with partner organisations. The Welsh Government, as part of their contribution to this project, facilitated engagement with not just their own internal stakeholders, but representatives from community groups and the investor and developer communities. We ran bilateral workshops first to better understand the perspectives of the different stakeholder communities. This input then enabled us to facilitate a series of multilateral workshops where we brought different stakeholders together in a constructive way to surface their different issues, open up their different perspectives to each other, and to promote discussion of what was needed to accelerate the Welsh Government's decarbonisation plans. Through this approach, we've identified and achieved an agreed consensus on priorities. Based on the roles of the people involved and working with the partners and stakeholders, we've identified 18 different personas of people with varying interests and responsibilities and who can benefit from the Powering Wales Renewably solution. These personas have helped us to look at the challenges we're addressing from their different perspectives. The output from each stage has formed the input to the next stage. Additionally, we've conducted a desktop review to identify relevant projects, the learning from which we can incorporate and build upon. Ultimately, based on what was identified as important by the stakeholders, we've prioritised outputs for the alpha and beta phases and developed our delivery plan and approach for alpha. Next slide, please. I've already mentioned that based on the roles and responsibilities of those participating in our workshops and interviews, we were able to identify 18 distinct personas based on their respective interests. Clearly, it'd be impossible to cover all of these in a 15-minute show and tell, but we've grouped them under each of the primary partners, along with some of their prioritised wants and needs. To highlight just a few of those priorities, for the Welsh Government, these included better visibility that would help inform policy action and community engagement. From the system user perspective, priorities included being able to identify potential locations and improve time and cost to connection. For the ESO, priorities included improved whole system coordination and resource utilisation, and also better visibility of embedded generation at the distribution level and how that could lead to impacts at the transmission level. For the transmission network operator, it's all about strategic network design, and for the distribution network operator, it was all about prioritising reinforcements, better outage planning, and how flexibility could be used to better operate the distribution system. Next slide, please. So when you come to look at the stakeholder priorities and the associated benefits against the three overarching use cases we identified and originally took into the workshops, the foundation use case, integrating for the first time intelligent digital models of distribution and transmission networks to provide a digital twin of the combined T&D infrastructure, was identified as being of key importance. It was identified as providing the visibility needed to better inform decision taking. It will also provide a trusted basis and common understanding of the issues to promote discussion, objective discussion between stakeholders. It was seen as enabling areas with available network capacity to be identified and enable connections where required. The ultimate benefit is seen as reducing time to get a connection. For the second overarching use case, that of enabling the use of flexibility, the need to coordinate the use of flexibility between system users was the identified priority. This was seen as improving the opportunity for distributed and consumer energy resources to participate in the provision of flexibility services, hence improving market liquidity and revenues for service providers and consumers. The improved visibility of the location of assets with flexibility was identified as an opportunity to improve the management of constraints and ultimately increase the ability to host renewables. For the third of our high-level use cases, that around connections and capacity, the opportunity for the twin was seen as enabling improvements to outage planning, underpinning the delivery of local area energy plans, and providing the ability to model changes to the connection queues and identify interdependencies between the transmission and distribution networks. This is expected to accelerate delivery of carbonisation and local energy plans, reduce the time to get a connection in the required location, and reduce the number and/or duration of outages, resulting in reduced disruption for consumers. Next slide, please. To provide an indication of some of the ways the discovery phase has helped us evolve our thinking, we started out by being very much focused on increasing the integration of renewable generation. Through the stakeholder workshops and interviews, the participants reminded us that that's just one side of the equation. It may seem obvious now, but identifying capacity to get decarbonised demand connected is equally important. This includes connections for loads like electrolyzers, if we want to expand our thinking to the whole energy system and not just the electricity system. Across all the partners, our lead contacts were able to get us access to people with the right experience and knowledge. Because of the short timescales, as I've already said, we had to adapt our preferred engagement approach to fit in with their calendars. And also, through the process, new contacts were identified through the workshop process, people who could bring additional input or additional insight in the areas we were interested in. One of perhaps the most surprising benefits was identifying the different system actor perspectives on the same underlying issues and the different problems that these created for them. We saw some light bulb moments from understanding things from each other's perspectives, a willingness to collaborate to solve these challenges through common interest. And that really helped us work through what to prioritize. The engagement enabled us to identify relevant data sets that we will need to access to help realization of the benefits we're targeting. Also, the definition of whole system. We started to identify a number of areas in governance, such as in the codes, that may need to be modified to support a future system. And this helped us to develop and identify our learning outcomes from the next phases of this project. Above all, there was consensus across stakeholders that powering Wales renewably will deliver something that can help accelerate delivery of decarbonisation objectives and action on climate. Simon, if you're still around, I'll hand back to you.
Thanks, Rich. I'm still here. So if you could move on to the next slide, please. We'll just finish off really with a look ahead towards to Alpha. So hopefully you'll agree it's an ambitious project from the scale and looking at addressing some of the challenges across the whole of Wales as a country, and how the digital twin that we're building can support those needs and that engagement. You know, based on the feedback from the stakeholder groups, we've tried to put some sort of principles around what we're looking to achieve in Alpha. So one of the key ones really, and what we want to do is get a representation of the full Welsh electricity network within the first 2 months of the Alpha project. So my view is that this isn't, just a technology project. In fact, it's more about the people and the engagement of those stakeholders as we move through alpha to inform the use cases that we're going to deliver in beta around connections and flexibility coordination. So we've taken an agile approach. We're looking to build then on top of the initial twin, a number of demonstrated products, which we will use through stakeholder workshops to get feedback and shape the real detail within those use cases and where we can make the most impact through the beta phase in those two areas. But the other key element of this, and I think we've heard from some of the other projects today as well, the data and access to data and consistent data is key to deliver the net zero transition. So we've got a dedicated collaboration stream within the alpha phase to speak with other innovators, stakeholders and community groups and businesses on how, and using the virtual energy system team to reach out to see how the network for Wales that will develop within the twin can be used by other projects to address some of the other areas that will help us all get to net zero by 2050. So I think that's everything from the project. Thank you very much for your time today. I don't know, Sean, if you've made it. But I'll hand it back to you, David, I think, for your questions. Thanks very much.
Yeah, thanks a lot for that. We've got one question in the chat already, which is simply asking, could you offer some examples of the code changes that you think might be required? Who would like to take that?
So there was a number of areas that were identified around things like when things can be taken, reinforcement investment can be taken onto the RAB and how that drives revenues for the networks businesses. Obviously, Ofgems and the ESO are running processes around connection queue management at the moment as well, to try and improve those, and the understanding of what's involved with getting a connection. I think this process can provide an evidential base that can help support some decision taking on it. So there's two examples in terms of codes and regulation that we will want to explore and potentially make recommendations on.
Brilliant, that's really helpful, Rich. Another question, and Jen, maybe you might be able to offer something on this as well, is there something particular about the Welsh archetype which means that this solution will be bespoke for it, or do you anticipate that actually when you get to the nub of the solution, it might be applicable everywhere equally?
Yeah, thanks, David. I don't believe that this will be bespoke to Wales. I believe that Wales is representative of the rest of the UK and regions very similar to Wales, where we've got both urban areas, rural areas, connections between the two. We have got areas that are very much off grid. And I think that the challenges, I think perhaps it's that we are in Wales facing perhaps some of the challenges around grid access slightly more soon than other areas, because we are slightly less well served with transmission grid in some areas. And that this, and perhaps also because of Wales's cooperative history. So collaboration is something that, we're practicing doing. And I think that whatever this project delivers, and we've heard multiple use cases, multiple potential outcomes that I think can help across the system and help all users. I expect these to be equally applicable across the rest of the GB system.